It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? Today is February 24th, which is a Friday. Happy Friday. Happy beginning of the weekend. I hope you're having a wonderful start to that whole weekend journey. And I hope you actually have some time to rest and relax this weekend. We're about to run through the news and there's a lot going on, a lot of things that have kind of slid under the radar. So we're gonna get into it and scroll through some of these articles. Now, I usually call this segment headlines, but I've been thinking of maybe updating it to headlines and hot takes because I love putting a little bit of my own opinion in here. And let me know what you think. If you like that titling better, please let me know in the comments. Now, yesterday we covered a story about Google, who is blocking access to some of their stories as a function of their search engine. So the headline here is that MPs want Google boss to be summoned to explain blocking of search for news sites. Now, as a way to combat Bill C-18, which is a way to get big tech to pay traditional news outlets and journalists more money. Google said it is testing ways to restrict Canadians' access to news in reaction to Bill C-18, adding that those included in the trial experienced varying degrees of limited access to news sites using its search function, but could still access them by typing a web address into the browser. Now, this is kind of like a really pathetic way to explain what's going on here. Like how if you primarily find your news through Google and by searching for things, how are you going to just type in the address of where you're looking to go? You would have to essentially travel to the future, figure out the news, copy the URL, travel back to the past, and then paste it into the browser bar. So I don't know what they expect out of this, but it's kind of a ridiculous explanation. Senator Paula Simons, who is formerly, I believe, a journalist, sits on the committee with that will be scrutinizing the bill, said that people think of Google as transparent. I guess you know what, Google has a pretty good kind of corporate reputation. Like we think of Amazon as like extremely evil, but Google, just because of their branding and who they are, they kind of do have a better reputation. Now I don't think of them as transparent, but I do think of them as not as bad as other major corporations. If they had just been upfront, Canadians may have responded differently. She said, people don't want to be played for fools. And yeah, I think that is kind of the problem going on here, is that Google, in doing this move, actually is demonstrating that, hey, maybe they have a disproportionate amount of power over how we receive our news, and they're actually just kind of bringing attention to how much power they have, how much influence they have, that I think is going to backlash on them. So, Paul Deegan, president of News Media Canada, said the government should shift the more than $8 million in it spends on marketing and advertising on Google back to news publications. So if you think our government is already spending $8 million on Google just in ads alone, so like, hey, yeah, maybe we shouldn't spend that money, since Google is essentially saying, hey, we're going to war with the Canadian government. Spending is one of the most important parts of the federal government's policy toolkit. The Canadian Association of Broadcasters, CAB, not to be confused with ACAB, which represents private broadcasters, accused Google of not playing fair. These are bully tactics, and Google is trying to push the Senate to back down on Bill C-18. We hope senators will see these actions for what they are, CAB President Kevin Desjardins said. So yeah, I agree. This is a time for the government to like basically double down. This is their chance to be like, hey, Google bad. And I mean, Google is bad. They are like, nobody should have so much power over our news media. So, I would encourage you to potentially do a little more digging. Obviously, Twitter and social media is a great other way to get your news. You don't have to always just search everything into Google. But I mean, hey, that's the one of the most convenient tools that we have. So, in other social media news, TikTok is being investigated by a coalition of Canadian privacy protection agencies. That will mean determining whether the smartphone app is obtaining valid and meaningful consent from users for its collection, use, and disclosure of their personal information. So this is a concern a lot of people have raised. Is a very popular issue in the U.S. It's part of the campaign against China, saying that TikTok is a Chinese app and it's spying on us. And my opinion has always been like, well, all of these corporations are spying on us. It just so happens that we here in North America seem to care more when it's China spying on us, because that makes it more political. And in my opinion, data should be something that should be incorporated into our human rights, and we should have ownership over our own data. So what is always funny to me about these stories is that they only go so far. They say, hey, we need to stop China from spying on us. It's like, well, why don't we stop China and Amazon and Netflix and Disney Plus and all the apps and Twitter and Facebook from spying on us? Or at least, why don't we own our own data, so that when these companies are selling our data, we as citizens, or we as our governments, are getting a cut of those profits that are being made off of our usership. So it's always funny to me, these articles never go that far in their criticism. They just stop at China bad. So according to NPR, which is the American outlet, the American, I think, public broadcaster, the FBI has expressed concern that the Chinese government could use the app to control users' devices or conduct influence campaigns. And it's like, okay, well, we are, yes, it's true. We are being influenced by social media in ways that are very hard to control and regulate. Why don't we just work hard at regulating them across the board, right? Like, we're fighting TikTok because China bad, but we're also, fighting Google because Google bad. So I don't know, where do we draw a line that affects all of these corporations kind of in an equal way? TikTok agreed to pay $2 million to settle a class action lawsuit, as well as a second similar Canadian case. This is back in 2020, I believe, though it did not make an admission of liability. Yes, so this was a Canadian class action filed in 2020 that accused TikTok of mishandling the data of its young users. Last year, a coalition of state attorneys in the U.S. announced a national investigation into the harms of using TikTok, saying that the harms using TikTok can cause young users. Okay, sorry. An investigation into the harms using TikTok can cause to young users, and what TikTok knew about those harms. So again, I'm not sure how I feel. Like, social media is bad. Social media is bad for kids. We should all be skeptical about how we use social media and the way that it influences us. It's basically, misinformation can go viral on these apps and affect us all negatively. Okay, moving on to some election news. Toronto has announced that it's going to replace John Tory, thank goodness, officially set in June 26th. Now, John Tory has already stepped down. We have an interim mayor. And on June 26th, with advanced voting running from June 8th to 13th, we are going to finally have an election in Toronto. It seems like it's quite a far way away, but at least they have announced it early so everyone can set their expectations. They said this was going to cost $20 million, and now they're saying $13 million, which is less than the $14.5 million it cost in October's municipal election. And so I guess that's good, but we'll see. Sometimes these estimations get inflated, and maybe it will end up costing $20 million. So there are a number of people who are considering throwing their hat in. Yes, thank you so much, Anti-Fur, for using the John Tory COVID hair emoji. Beaches East York Councillor Brad Bradford and Toronto St. Paul Councillor Josh Matlow are two possible contenders. Former Councillor Anna Bailao, who didn't run for re-election in October, has also said she is considering a bid. Former Toronto Police Chief Mark Sanders, an unsuccessful candidate for the Progressive Conservative Party in last June's provincial election, is gauging support from the public before making a decision. If you follow this channel, we are an ACAP channel, so ideally no former Toronto police chiefs. Liberal MPP Mitzi Hunter has said she is thinking about launching a bid while also contemplating a run for leadership of her provincial party. Gil Penalosa, an urbanist who placed second in last fall's race, will be running again. What does it mean to be an urbanist? Does that mean he's just like um a kind of environmentalist who believes that human beings can do the least damage by living in an urban setting? Okay, sure. I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical about Gil Penalosa, but okay. I mean, that shouldn't affect my bias against people who are urbanists. So, in other election news, this time coming to the Ontario provincial election, MP Nathaniel Erskine Smith is building support for a run at the Ontario Liberal leadership. So here he is with his family. Presumably, they look like a very nice family. He's dressed as the Easter Bunny for some reason. I guess it is at the Easter parade in Toronto Beach's neighborhood. This outfit is ridiculous, and quite frankly, it makes me consider liking him a little bit. They look like they're having fun. So this is probably, if Nathaniel Erskine Smith runs, he will probably win. That's my prediction. You heard it here first. If the momentum continues to grow, he says, as it has been growing, I'm very confident we're going to join the race when it opens up, he said. So, I mean, this is almost a guarantee, I think, that he will be in the race. Now, he is an MP, meaning he works at the federal level, and he's thinking about maneuvering to the provincial leadership. So I don't exactly know how that's going to work, but I guess he would have to step away of his position as a MP in order to make that transition. Earlier this week, Ontario Green Party leader Mike Schreiner announced that he would not run for Liberal leader. So this has kind of like opened up the lane for any Libs who want to run. So his weakness is that he doesn't speak French, which, not something that I would personally hold against him, but obviously a lot of communities in Northern Ontario and whatnot depend on French language. So that is going to be an asset. He's restarting his French lessons, and he admits that it's an area he needs to improve in. He and others have proposed a change to the party's rules that would allow each party member a vote on who becomes the next leader, rather than only delegates from local Liberal associations. Supporters of the change say it would give the grassroots a say. So actually, this is something I didn't even know about the Liberal Party in Ontario. Their members don't vote? That seems like highly undemocratic. So no wonder they end up with these kind of like trash leaders of their party, because they're only being elected by local Liberal associations. So yeah, this is something I didn't realize, that basically the Liberal Party in Ontario has had no grassroots representation for I don't even know how long. But it kind of explains why you get these very establishment picks like Stephen Del Duca in the last election. So I think if Nathaniel Erskine Smith runs, he will win. I also have heard from what I've seen on Twitter, so not the most reliable source, but that he is a supporter, at least personally, of proportional representation electoral reform. So that's my main issue. So I mean, I would love to see a Liberal, NDP, and Green kind of coalition who are all supporting this idea of electoral reform. I think it needs to happen. It should happen in Ontario. It should happen in all the provinces and territories. It should happen at the federal level. And, I would love to see it. In other Canadian news here, we're now going to the federal level. Ottawa, well, I guess federal and provincial levels. Ottawa reaches an agreement in principle with 5 provinces for federal healthcare funding. This is good news, I guess. Mr. Trudeau was in Halifax to announce the agreements in principle with Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Prince Edward Island. When I read this the first time, I was like, wait, what? It's only 5. How come there's 6? It's because Newfoundland and Labrador are get to be their own special thing together. They're in it together. Ontario's share of the bilateral funding amounts to $8.4 billion over 10 years, while Nova Scotia will get 1.01 billion, New Brunswick 900 million, Newfoundland and Labrador 749 million, and PEI 288 million. So really, it doesn't amount to that much money for most of these provinces. Again, this is something to keep in mind, that this is an increase in funding, but we're not expected to see like a complete transformation in our healthcare systems. One thing that I thought was interesting is that well, the feds are saying that, hey, we're gonna release these targets that you're going to have to meet and define over the first 3 years, and premiers can set their own targets. Justin Trudeau is saying that you can set your own goals, and they're looking for really aggressive goals, such as like 75% have or 95% of the population having a regular family care team. So this is a kind of weird, I guess. Like I would prefer that the federal governments are setting these aggressive goals for us already. The criticism here is that Justin Trudeau said that 100% of Canadians are going to have a family doctor or primary healthcare team. That was one of the election promises that he has stated. So I guess by allowing premiers to set even a lower goal than 100%, it is a bit of a backtrack on that. Now, lastly, here's what the premiers are saying. The provinces are saying. Nova Scotia Health Minister Michelle Thomson said her province will hire more healthcare workers and expand the way people can access care. Now, when you hear this, expand the way people can access care, you might think, well, that might mean privatization. Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey said the new funding is critical to modernizing the system. So that's in reference to the new way, I think, that data will be collected and shared amongst all the provinces and the feds. Ontario Health Minister Sylvia Jones said in a statement that the additional funding will bolster the province's investments in healthcare as the government implements its new plan for connected and convenient care, which is a very diplomatic way of saying we're going to privatize our healthcare system. NDP, this is our last story of the day because we're trying to keep this under 20 minutes. NDP asked for investigation into Doug Ford over fundraising party daughter's wedding. So this is good news coming out of Ontario. We are going to have, hopefully, an official investigation into these matters. If you haven't heard already, Doug Ford essentially invited some developers, people who have a vested interest in the development of Ontario, to his daughter's stag and dough party, where they were asking people for $150 at the door, but were pressured to donate even more money, like about maybe $1,000. So Marit Stiles is saying, I am concerned that invitees felt pressure to contribute to the Premier's family fundraiser, particularly as some invitees felt they weren't being asked as friends of the Premier, but as government stakeholders, and feared impacts on their professional reputations and working relationships with the government. So yeah, that's obviously a concern when you invite these people who have a stake in how the government operates. They might feel more obliged to give you that $1,000, and because who's going to look at those numbers, who's going to have the influence over the government? We don't really know, and that's what we need to find out. So Mr. Wake, who is the dude, he's the guy that's going to conduct the investigation. I'm forgetting his official title right now, but he basically is the dude, as I said. Mr. Wake is already investigating an earlier complaint from Ms. Stiles. He is looking into whether Mr. Ford's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, violated rules on conflict of interest and revealing inside information by tipping off developers before announcing the government's decision last November to break its promises and allow development on certain parts of the protected Greenbelt. So I probably should have just summarized that and said, yeah, Mr. Wake is already looking into the Greenbelt. And so this is going to mean another investigation, and there already are like several things, because everything that Doug Ford does seems to be like have a little hint of corruption mixed in there. So thank you so much for joining us on Headlines and Hot Takes. Let me know what you think of the new name in the comments. Please give us a like, give us a subscription on YouTube if that's where you're watching, and we really appreciate it. When we reach 250 subscribers, we are going to have a special Saturday news stream on YouTube. We're going to break away from Twitch and stream on YouTube. So if that's where you like to watch us, please make sure you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. My homie Tutaro. Peace.